everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Rekka, and I create sewing tutorials and patterns with detailed step-by-step instructions so that anyone can make their own unique wardrobe. Join me in this video as we take on the exciting journey of crafting this beautiful dress, from the first stitch to the final touch. I'll leave the link to the dress pattern and all the essential information needed for making it in the description below. Today's project inspiration is this dress I came across on my Pinterest feed. I was immediately drawn to its simplicity yet with a little twist, which always makes it my favorite kind of garment. After designing my version and creating the pattern, I chose this shiny, medium-weight satin fabric for the dress. Here's all the material you will need for this project. After we've cut out all the pieces, let's start sewing. First, we'll sew together the main parts of the dress. Pin together the back and side back pieces and the front and side front pieces. Match the ends first, then align the notches and pin where necessary. Sew with a 1 cm seam allowance, remembering to backstitch at the beginning and end. Always watch the seam allowance by the needle. Turn the fabric so that there is always a distance of 1 cm between the needle and the edge of the fabric. The curved section might be a bit challenging for beginners. Feel free to use more pins or baste with larger stitches by hand first. It's better to sew slowly for a precise and neat result. Check the stitching on the bust area to ensure it turned out nicely. It shouldn't be angular, and the curve should be smooth. You can refine it further with ironing. After sewing the front pieces and back pieces together, we sew the two sides together. First align the two ends and then the notches, and sew with a seam allowance of 1 cm. Press all seams flat. Clip the seam allowance along the curved parts to allow for easier turning and smooth finishing. After clipping the seam allowances, press the front seam allowances toward the center front, press the side seams and the back seams toward the center back. If necessary, carefully press the seams on the right side of the fabric as well. Finish all seam allowances with an overlock or zigzag stitch, except for the top and bottom of the dress. At the seams where 2 layers are already next to each other, finish the 2 seam allowances together. We will sew the lining in the same way. First, sew the center back and the back side pieces together. Then, sew the center front and the front side pieces together. After that, sew the 2 sides together. press all the seam allowances flat. Clip the seam allowance on the curved part to allow for a little bit of ease. This way, when you press it, it will lay smooth and flat without any bunching. Press open all the seam allowances. You can make pressing the curved parts easier by using a tailor's ham. Simply press open the straight parts on the ironing board. In the next step, we will finish the lining hem. Depending on the thickness of the fashion fabric, we will choose a sewing technique. If the fabric is thick, you can simply use an overlock stitch on the hem. If it is thinner, I recommend using a hem stitch with a width of 1 cm or 1 mm. For thin fabrics, a double 1 cm fold will be the best solution. This method will not be bulky and will not show through the waist area. I made a narrow rolled hem. Fold 1 cm towards the wrong side, sew close to the edge. Trim any excess fabric. Fold it again narrowly, matching the width left after trimming. Sew along the previous seam line. Press it flat with an iron. Now let's move on to the straps. Cut them diagonally at a 45-degree angle. Cut one strip that is about 70-80 centimeters long and 3 centimeters wide. Fold the strap in half lengthwise with the right sides together and sew about 7 millimeters from the edge. Trim the seam allowances to a width of 2-3 millimeters. Double thread a needle with the largest eye. Knot the end of the thread and sew it tightly to the end of the strap, going through just one layer of fabric. Turn the needle upside down and insert it into the tube, guiding it through until it emerges on the other side. Use the thread to pull the strap completely inside out. If you have a loop turner, you can use that instead. This technique is just an alternative if you don't have access to another tool. On the pattern, you will find a narrow rectangle. Measure the strap against it and cut 2 identical pieces. pin the strap to the front at this pointed part, aligning it with the right side of the fashion fabric with the strap facing inward. Then pin the strap to the back at the center back and backside seams. Make sure the strap does not twist. Pin in the other side as well. Next, pin the lining on with the right side facing down. Align the edges and seams precisely. Sew along the top of the dress with a seam allowance of 1 centimeter. Making sure to sew only the 2 layers and the strap where it's pinned. Fold the seam allowance towards the lining. Place the right side of the main fabric facing up on your sewing machine. Sew very close to the seam line, about 2 millimeters away from the seam, through the lining and the seam allowance. Fold the seam allowance of the strap on the back towards the lining along with the rest. Understitching can be tricky, especially around curves. Go slowly and guide the fabric carefully. When you approach the strap, stop sewing a few centimeters before reaching it. Backstitch at this point. Then, on the other side of the strap, resume sewing from a similar distance away from the strap. The stitching should not be visible from the front, and the lining should stay neatly behind the main fabric. After understitching, check your work from the right side of the fabric. Press the lining away from the main fabric. This helps the lining sit neatly and keeps the edges sharp. Leave about 1 millimeter of the main fabric visible from the inside, but be careful that the lining does not show on the outside at all. Exit the zipper and place the right side of the zipper against the right side of the fabric. Pin the zipper tape to the seam allowance on one side of the fabric. Pin the zipper tape only to the main fabric. Make sure the plastic stopper of the zipper is at the top edge of the fabric. Fold the extra tape outward and pin it. Attach an invisible zipper foot to your sewing machine. Sew down one side of the zipper, keeping the stitch close to the zipper teeth. Zip up the zipper and pin the other side of the fabric to the zipper tape, with the right sides together. Mark where you finished sewing the previous side of the zipper. Sew this side exactly to the same point. Sew the zipper close to the teeth. Zip up the zipper and check that the stitching turned out nicely. Sew the seam below the zipper, starting a bit above the end of the zipper and a few millimeters in from the edge. I use a zipper foot for this seam. If you have one, I recommend using it because it is narrower and allows you to sew closer to the zipper. Fold back the part of the zipper above the plastic stopper, turning it slightly outward. Then, fold the lining fabric over it. Guide the edge of the lining exactly with the edge of the main fabric, then pin it close to the zipper teeth. Pin both sides. Use the same zipper foot and sew very close to the zipper teeth. Be careful not to sew into the teeth so that the zipper functions smoothly. With small scissors or your nail, you can easily follow the path of the zipper. Sew both sides, then check the final result. Turn the top inside out and diagonally trim the seam allowance at the corners. Be careful not to cut into the stitching. This way, It will look much neater after turning it right side out, and there won't be excess fabric in one spot. Also trim the seam allowances at the front straps in the same way. Smooth out the lining over the main fabric so that it doesn't bunch up anywhere, then pin it at the seams on the back and the front. Thread a needle and not the end of the thread. Stitch into the seam allowance of the main fabric, then into the edge of the lining. Don't pull the thread too tight. The lining should have some mobility. And sew in this way at all 4 places where we pinned. Now only the hem of the dress remains. Fold the hem horizontally in half with the right sides facing in, then sew the 2 ends together with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. After sewing both sides, press the seams flat. Then turn the fabric inside out. It's important to fully push out the corners so they are not tucked in. If you didn't fully turn out the corner on your first attempt, you can carefully use a pin to gently pull out the corner. Press the 2 ends flat after turning it right side out. Do not press along the fold line. Pin the hem piece to the bottom of the skirt, right sides together. The open side of the hem piece should face the edge of the skirt. Start pinning at the center back seam of the dress, then evenly distribute and pin the rest of the fabric around. Align the edges of the 3 layers precisely. I prefer to pin the 2 ends first and then distribute the remaining fabric evenly between these 2 points. Pin this hem piece to the bottom of the dress, right sides facing each other. I used a 4-thread overlock stitch to sew these 3 layers together at once, as it both sews and finishes the edges. If you use a zigzag stitch or a 3-thread overlock to finish the edges, be sure to first sew them together with a straight stitch on the sewing machine before finishing the edge. With a sewing machine, I often sew over the cross-pinned pins because the machine can easily handle them. However, with a serger, be careful not to get too close to the pins, as they can dull the blade. At the end of a serger seam, undo a small portion and thread all the threads into a large needle. With the needle facing backward, insert it into the serger seam and guide it through a few centimeters. Pull out the needle and trim the excess. Do this with both ends. place the dress on a mannequin or hanger, ensuring it is hanging vertically. This will make it easier to work with. Starting from the center back, separate the two layers of the hem and lift the inner layer while holding it until it just covers the seam at the bottom of the dress. I pin the corner of the hem to the center back seam. For the rest, there's no fixed system. You can pin as densely as you like, depending on your preference. First, I always spread out the fabric and pin one point at the top, making sure to lift it to roughly the same height so that the seam allowance doesn't show anywhere. Then I pin a few points in the middle as well. Sometimes I pull the fabric slightly from its original position or adjust it to create larger gathers. I always pin at the top and in the middle, roughly so that one middle pin falls between two top pins. That's why it's important not to press down the lengthwise edge of the hem so there isn't a visible line and it can move softly. I pin it about every 15 centimeters. It also isn't good if you try to pin it too much. It will become too stiff and lose its softness. It's worth pinning around and adjusting it if you're not satisfied with the end result. I pin around using this method, and at the end, I check to see where I might need to add a few more pins or adjust the height. The goal is to make it look consistent throughout without any huge variations. Pin the other corner to the center back seam as well. Thread a needle with the same color thread as the fabric and not the end. Sew a few stitches at each pin. Try to sew back and forth in one spot to make the thread less visible, and always knot it at the back. When sewing in the middle, you can sew through all 3 layers. At the top pins, only sew through the inner layer and a few centimeters lower so that the fabric can easily fold back without sharp lines like at the pins. Adjust the fabric to your liking, and you're done with the dress. Thanks for joining me in this sewing tutorial. I hope you enjoyed learning how to create your dress and picked up some helpful tips along the way. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you'd like. Your support means a lot to me. I'll be back soon with another video. Until next time, happy sewing!